So just make sure you're in the right place. This is our webinar meeting this morning, Hazard Mitigation Grants for Nonprofits. My name is Mark Bentian, Earthquake Country Alliance Executive Director. Thank you all for joining us. This workshop has been coordinated under our nonprofit and faith-based committee, and you'll be able to learn more about those committees in a moment here. We have and Sharon Destiny's just arrived here. So we just one moment while we set up our sign language interpreter. Come on camera, Destiny, when you're able. Oh, there. One moment, everyone. She's having a challenge joining us today. As we wait for Destiny to join our interpreter, I'm sorry about this, everyone. So Earthquake Country Alliance, as many of you know if you're already members, is a statewide organization. We have many leaders across the state, and we consider all of you such a leader. And thank you for joining us. And if you aren't an actual member of Earthquake Country Alliance, please take a moment now, go to earthquakecountry.org/join, and then it's a very simple form. It won't take you long at all. Sorry, I'm setting up our interpreter now. There you are. Hi, Destiny. Thanks for joining. Our funding for the Earthquake Country Alliance is provided by a national program called the National Earthquake Hazards Reduction Program that supports research on earthquake science and engineering, as well as implementing that lessons learned through FEMA's support to states, such as the support for California that in turn helps fund Earthquake Country Alliance's earthquake education, outreach, and mitigation activities. We also get support for some of the other organizations here. And then if everybody could keep their cells on mute unless speaking later on. Thank you very much. And we have a number of statewide activities, our website and all the resources you can find there, really intended to be a resource for all of you to use and share and take the materials and print and distribute. These are Earthquake Country Alliance is meant to be an overall organization for all of us. To create consensus materials together and share that for all of us to use. So you don't need to ask permission to use anything that we have. It's all meant for general broad use. We also support the Tsunami Preparedness Week in March, but of course coming up is Great California Shakeout. And if your organization is not yet registered for Shakeout, today's a great time to do that. Go to shakeout.org/California and you can either renew your past registration or create a brand new one. Mention our committees. We have 8 sector-based outreach committees, including nonprofit and faith-based organizations, which is the organizer of today's workshop, as we are focusing on nonprofits and how they can get grant funding to improve their earthquake resilience. And but we do have these others, and if you're interested in being a part of any of these, helping to create that consensus messaging I mentioned, you can go to earthquakecountry.org/committees. Again, these links are also being put in the chat. We also have outreach bureaus, including our events bureau. And if you would like a presenter or like us to come out with a booth at your event, go to earthquakecountry.org/events to fill out a request form. That gives us all the information, and then we'll try to arrange someone to either speak online or in person, or to have a group come out with a table for your preparedness fair or other type of event. Okay, and a lot of our information is organized around the 7 steps to earthquake safety. We always go through this, but this is really useful, a great way of organizing how to be prepared to survive and recover. And so there's resources and a lot of information on each of these topics on our website at earthquakecountry.org/7steps, and in Spanish at terremotos.org/siete pasos. We also have translated many of our materials now into 15 languages, including English. We're working on an additional language to add in now. Resources on earthquake safety, how to secure items, what to do during earthquakes, including if you're someone who cannot drop, cover, and hold on, but maybe you use a wheelchair or walker or just can't drop down to the ground. So we have guidance for what to do for anyone, and also in many different situations. So if you've just joined, again, welcome to our discussion this morning on hazard mitigation grants for nonprofits. And again, my name is Mark Benthian, Director for Communication, Education, and Outreach at the Southern California Earthquake Center at USC. And we actually lead the Earthquake Country Alliance and coordinate its efforts. And again, please keep your sound muted and ask questions in the chat, where you're seeing a lot of great links being added, but you can also be asking your questions as we go through. Our agenda today is we're going to hear from several people who've had a lot of experience with this area. And so Inez Pierce, Chief Executive for Pierce Global Partners, who will be moderating this discussion, Glenn Granholm with Safety Proof, Michael Flood with the LA Foodbank, and Anthony Roggio with California Office of Emergency Services, who manages California's program that this is all about in terms of how to get this support and funding. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Inez for initial comments and to begin our discussion. Inez.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you, Earthquake Country Alliance, for hosting this event. And welcome to all of you to the Hazard Mitigation Grants for Nonprofit webinar. So we have a lot of great information to share with you and some terrific speakers who can talk from personal experience. Obviously, you're seeing through the chat, you'll get a lot of links and resources. And that's what we want to leave you with is, one, the information that you can take steps on, two, the resources that are available to help you, and three, that instill a little bit of an opportunity to take action to make your organizations or organizations that are within your purview safer. We know that we live in earthquake country, and in California, we have more than just earthquakes that we're concerned about. So I just want to do a quick explanation, then we'll get started. So what happens after a disaster, if it's large enough to get a presidential disaster declaration, what that means is it brings federal aid and federal assistance into that community that's been struck by disaster. There are specific programs that can help a community in times of that big disaster. And we're not talking about the timing right after something happens. That's the response and recovery piece. We're talking about when those disasters strike, there's monies that become available to assist people when they're getting prepared and trying to reduce their hazard from a future disaster. And that's a time that we're in right now. Again, we've had fires, we've had all kinds of events that have happened in the past. And then those money, which is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and what we call HMGP for short, for a reason, that's a mouthful. But HMGP is a program that can help public agencies and nonprofits, public or private nonprofits, that really could use these monies to make themselves stronger and more resilient against earthquakes and other disasters. So we're here to provide you an overview of that information and examples of organizations that have actually done this very thing, to give you that information and show you how you could use it and some examples of how it could be applied. Just so you know, it doesn't have to be specific for earthquake, but we know through ECA that this is a big risk that we have in this state, and there's a lot we can do to make ourselves safer for earthquakes, and that would also translate to being prepared for other disasters. So we're going to, again, go through HMGP, give you some examples and resources that can help you to take action. And I want to not talk too much longer because I want to hand it over to our next speakers, but I'll come back and give you some additional information that can give you some examples of how this money could be applied, actually applied for, and then how you could use it in your organizations to help you be more resilient. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our first speaker on the agenda, Glenn, if you're ready. With
Yeah.
Proof. There you go. Okay, take it away, Glenn.
Thank you, Naz, Mark, and welcome everyone. My heart soars to see so many people here at this gathering this morning. It's wonderful. You know, the story of the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank and their accessing hazard mitigation grant funds for the retrofit of their Vernon campus is an amazing one. It's a continually unfolding one. And my part in it was pretty small, but I think pretty important in that at least I do this for a living, not the HMGP. I do non-structural retrofit of buildings. That's my career. I was given a phone call by a friend who's told me that there was funds available for nonprofits that were not often accessed. In fact, maybe nonprofits did not know about it. So I got that information and I went to a meeting of ENLA in Southern California, Emergency Network of Los Angeles, made up of nonprofits, and simply shared that information. That's when I had the wonderful pleasure of meeting Michael Flood from the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank. He runs that campus and that agency. So we met. I took a brief tour of the food bank campus in Vernon, South Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles. And based on my experience, I could tell certainly there were a lot of non-structural vulnerabilities that could be addressed through proper retrofit. The next step was to, and Anthony will cover this, I'm certain, was to submit a notice of interest, which is very simple and very quick. It's just, I'm going to paraphrase, it's a nonprofit saying, we're interested in money. Please give it to us. We want to get more resilient. The next thing that happened was I went with the facility director from the food bank to an orientation that was given part by Cal OES and part by FEMA. There were about 200 people in the room representing other agencies interested in getting FEMA money in Southern California. And of those 200 people, the food bank was the only nonprofit there. See, this money is eligible for government agencies and nonprofits. And I couldn't believe that there weren't more nonprofits there. One, we found out that the steps that needed to happen, because basically a project needs to be shovel ready. That's the term FEMA uses. There has to be a project with a budget and a schedule submitted in order to get grants to pay for most of that retrofit work. That meant the food bank needed to find out what their vulnerabilities even were, because they're not in the business of earthquake retrofit, they're in the business of distributing food. So when it comes to earthquakes, we had to come up with a way to determine what the structural vulnerabilities were to the buildings. And then the part that I knew about, the non-structural buildings are vulnerabilities to the building that specifically are broken out into 4 categories, all of which applied to the food bank, and maybe not all of which applied to every nonprofit. This food bank campus, this retrofit turned out to be a major project. A structural engineer was brought on who did a risk analysis of the actual structural vulnerabilities for the buildings themselves and their collapse possibilities. The buildings were built to the code at the time they were built, but the current codes have developed way past that point. So there were several aspects of retrofit that were recommended so that the place was earthquake safe. I then did not a risk analysis like a structural engineer would do. I did a vulnerability study for the 4 categories of potential risk that included suspended ceilings, fire sprinklers, furniture and equipment, and racking systems. So again, your nonprofit may not have all of those. The other thing that was key to this was it was encouraged as part of the submission to FEMA to get a letter of recommendation from the city that the food bank plays an important part in the overall resilience of Southern California, which indeed they most definitely do. And post-earthquake, as you can imagine, there'll be, what is the term, code black. The demand may exceed what they can even provide, because a lot more people are going to need resources from the food bank, and they only have so much size and so much staff. So I approached the chief resilience officer for the city, and I asked him for a letter, and he didn't really realize that the food bank played such an important role. In fact, he thought the food bank really helped with the homeless issue, and that department of the city was involved with the food bank, not the resilience department. I was pretty shocked and decided to invite him to come to the food bank and look around and meet people. Well, it turns out that not only this food bank, but food banks all over and nonprofits all over, like yours, play an important role in the overall resilience of wherever you are. And that is a key element to this that I think is a good starting point for each and every one of you, is to engage with community officials, city officials, and talk about that, how vital you are to their recovery. The process of developing what is called a sub-application was large because the project was large. There are categories of grant monies available that aren't that this project did not encompass, that may apply to your specific nonprofit, and Anthony, I'm sure, can talk more about that. But basically, that was my role in this project, was to help Los Angeles Food Bank get their sub-application submitted, and then subsequently, in working with Inez and her organization, done vulnerability studies on a bunch more food banks throughout California. And with that, I'll wrap it up, and we can pass it over to Michael so he can share his experience.
Thanks, Glenn. So Michael Flood, President and CEO of the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank, will talk next.
Great, thank you. And thanks for laying the groundwork, Glenn. Appreciate that. And first, when I met Glenn, as he mentioned, it was at a meeting of Emergency Network Los Angeles, which is our BOAD for Los Angeles County. We're a little bit unusual here, where we incorporated as our own nonprofit organization after the Northridge earthquake in '94, and that was a good decision for us as NLA, because we've been able to secure grant funding, hire staff, and do other things that are critical for the work of NLA. And from a food bank standpoint, as Glenn described, that assessment is really important to understand if your nonprofit organization is a good candidate for this. We, as you heard, were a good candidate for this grant funding because the buildings that we operate here, it's actually in South Los Angeles, even though it's a Vernon zip code. It's in the city of Los Angeles, and we have 96,000 square feet of warehouse and office space here, 3 different buildings, and the buildings were constructed in the late '80s. So as Glenn described, even though they met code at that time, here we are many years later, there have been significant changes to building codes since that time. Here we are in 2022, and the need really is there for us to go through this process and, in essence, retrofit the buildings in both a structural and non-structural way. We identified the buildings being old, a structural opportunity. We submitted a sub-application for the structural category. As Glenn described, there were non-structural things within the building that need to be updated. So we submitted a grant for that. And we also submitted a grant for power. In the end, we were successful for 2 of the 3 sub-applications that we submitted for the structural and the non-structural. And for us, the overall opportunity is right around $2 million, which is, obviously very significant. Really kind of in summary, what that means is the food bank needs to put up 25% of either the funding, or it can be an in-kind match. So that's also an important point of this, to really pull down the 75% of funding through this grant program. So for us, that seemed, a great opportunity for us. And we're continuing to work through the process. COVID slowed us down a little bit, but we're kind of gaining steam now on this. And, it certainly has been very much worthwhile. The one thing I would say for probably a lot of nonprofits is this is a much longer process than your typical even government grant process. It's just sort of the nature of this funding. You have Cal OES interfacing with FEMA also on this. So the timeline, you have to be patient, but I think we have found it's been entirely beneficial for us to kind of walk through this process. So that's kind of what our experience is. And I know we're going to hear more about the specifics of this grant program, but that really is what I have to share.
Thanks, Michael. And we're going to take questions in just a moment, so think about any questions that you have. I just want to add a couple comments. When we talk about nonprofits, we're giving you a lot of examples of food banks. It's not only food banks, it's not limited to food banks. I'm going to put on a different hat. I actually also run a nonprofit, the Disaster Resistant Business. We work with small businesses and nonprofits, and specifically, as mentioned by Glenn, we were inspired by what the Los Angeles Foodbank did, and we put a project together to work on, sorry for the sirens, 12 food banks across the state that collectively partner with about 2,200 organizations in 43 counties in California, and they distribute about 540 million pounds of food across the state. And as the pandemic showed us, food banks are really critical. So that was, again, we're giving you examples of food banks, but it's not the only thing. You provide specific services in the community, your constituency, your particular group, whether it's homeless, elderly, maybe children. And if you're not available after an earthquake or another disaster, that particular part of the community overall, or your specific group that you target, a vulnerable population, those people are not going to have you there. So we really see the value in getting nonprofits better prepared before something happens. As you saw the examples here, looking at earthquakes and structural and non-structural as examples, but it's whatever you need for your organization. So I'm going to open it up to some questions here that you might have. I saw a few things come in the chat. Let's see.
Inez, there's a question from Jenny. She asks, may I ask what the 4 vulnerability categories are one more time? Glenn mentioned this under scope.
Glenn, that's for you.
Yes, so non-structural categories at the time we presented this, and I believe they're still the same, include furniture and equipment is one category. Think office furniture or other equipment that you need to run your business. Don't forget rooftop equipment or equipment that may be in your plant, that type of stuff. 2 is suspended ceilings. Those are quite common in all kinds of buildings, particularly office spaces in California. 3 are fire sprinklers. Not all buildings have fire sprinklers, but if you do, there is a prescriptive method for securing those so they don't engage with the ceiling and cause a problem in an earthquake or otherwise just break. And the last is industrial racking systems. Now, these are common to food banks. Many of the larger campuses have these, and there's methods not only for securing the racking themselves, but there's methods to hold pallets on the rackings.
We have another question. Is a homeowners association considered a nonprofit? Bylaws say that it is nonprofit mutual benefit association.
Actually, a question for Anthony, if Anthony can take that one.
Yeah, I did see that. So it may, I'm not going to go into the law of whether or not, that is technically considered a private nonprofit or whatnot, but it may not fall into the category as being something that is eligible under the program to receive funding. What we're looking for first and foremost is typically going to be a private nonprofit that is offering some sort of essential government service to the general public, and they operate a facility to do such. That's why the food bank has been such an excellent example to use so far, because of what they offer the public in the event of an emergency or disaster. So I don't know if a homeowners association, how high they would rank in the process. So I'm not gonna count them out. But I could say that they may not be able to rank super highly in the program. But I would say not to let that discourage you from at least trying and maybe submitting a notice of interest or submitting some sort of interest to us, and then we can maybe look into it. Who knows? I mean, the project you have may be very beneficial at providing some level of resilience, and I could be wrong in what I'm saying entirely. So, I like I said, at face value, maybe not super high ranking, but again, I wouldn't let that discourage you from at least trying to get involved in the program.
And thanks. And Anthony's going to go into more detail on that. And there's some questions about the resources. We have a fantastic resource in Anthony, and we'll share with you where else you can find information. There's one question here from Marilyn about the focus of these grants. Is it recovery? No, it's actually mitigation. So pre-disaster, the things that you can do to strengthen, to retrofit, to reduce or remove your potential for these hazards. In the case of earthquake, we're talking a lot about today, from impacting you. So the money comes available post-disaster, but it doesn't, let's say there's a wildfire that occurs and it's a presidential declaration, the money that comes available could be used for other hazards than wildfire, for earthquake and so forth.
I would say the best way to describe it would be pre-next disaster.
Good.
Inez,
Yeah.
one of the things I want to point out, that notice of interest form can be filled out in minutes. And for lack of a better word, Anthony, please correct me if I'm wrong here. That's almost like a culling document. You're going to find out right away up front whether your organization is in the running to, and is a competitive process that was emphasized a lot. There's X amount of money and X amount of applicants. But it is during that notice of interest process when you get a letter back that letter says, hey, you absolutely will qualify for this, submit your sub-application.
And
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I would agree with that, Glenn. I think you're on the right track there.
it never hurts to submit. It never hurts to submit. And Glenn, the notice of intent's changed a little bit since when you completed it. It's a little bit more thought out, and it's more like just coming up with a description of what the overview is. But I think that's also helpful for nonprofits to really put some thought into what they want to do, other than just generally, I want to apply. It's like, what do you want to do with those funds? So it's actually helpful. All right. Sharon, any last quick questions? And we'll hand it over to.
There are several questions in the chat, so let's go through those.
Okay.
Does the nonprofit need to have ownership of the building's property in order to access retrofitting funds?
Yes, for structural retrofit, yes. For non-structural, no. But there's more than one thing you can use the grant funds for, but Glenn, that's it in a nutshell, right? You were going to say something. You're on mute, Glenn.
Yes, you're 100% correct. That's my understanding, is if you own the building, go ahead and if you have structural vulnerabilities, apply for that. If you do not own the building, then check out your non-structural vulnerabilities and apply for that. If you own it, apply for both.
Yeah, whether you own it or not, there are things that you can do to make your organization, your operations, your people safer. Sharon, any?
Another question is, would a provider of affordable housing, community services programs, and life plan communities qualify?
I guess I would need to know a little bit more about what those are. This is the thing about private nonprofits, is that this is not necessarily my world of expertise. So I don't know of all the offerings that exist, you know, as in regards to PMPs and NGOs and whatnot. But we'd really have to. This would be one of the situations where we'd want to see, you know, at least a notice of interest submitted, so we could get an idea of what it is that agency or association does, and what it is that you're looking to achieve with the project that you're submitting funding for, and then we can make a determination based on that. It's kind of hard to put a blanket yes or no on that. I'd really want to see a little bit more about the agency and the program the project that's being potentially submitted for.
And there was a question about where do you find the notice of intent? I think Anthony's going to talk about that.
Yeah, I'll go over that in my presentation portion.
There's a question from Sandra that there was a mention of project needing to be shovel ready. What about projects already underway?
Okay, so that's a good question. I'm glad that someone asked that, because I forgot. So we don't only look for shovel ready projects. While those are typically more preferable because they're ready to go, they've already been essentially scoped out, designed, etc. We tend to look at those as being able to essentially be enacted much quicker than a non-shovel ready project, which may not have design, or anything like that done. You don't necessarily need to have shovel ready, project shovel ready, but projects where you have already started the work, those are strictly ineligible to receive funding in the program. You have to go through the full gamut of state and federal review before you can undergo any type of work, really. So there's a limited number of actions that can be done prior to approval, and that's very limited, and none of them are actual physical work. So yeah, projects that have already been done or are already being done are typically going to be ineligible for funding.
And one thing to mention is that, thank you, Anthony, is that as a nonprofit, you fill out the notice of intent, you get the approval. In that pre-application development phase, keep track of your costs, because if you do get approved by by Cal OES, California Office of Emergency Services, if they approve your HMGP application, you can become eligible to cover some of those application costs. And I know Anthony's going to talk about that, but that's one of those things that doesn't get talked about a lot, is if you get the HMGP approval, some of those costs, like people's time, the labor, can be reimbursed. So keep that in mind, is that, again, that softens the risk for nonprofits applying for this. And I think that also helps, because that's not typical with many other grant applications. So if we don't have any more questions, I want to hand it over to Anthony, because there's a lot for you to say and very important information. So Anthony Roggio is the Southern Region Lead Hazard Mitigation Specialist from the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, and we want him to jump right in. Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you, Inez. I appreciate it very much. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So today I'm just going to take a brief portion of your time and kind of go over what hazard mitigation assistance is, the program essentially that is being administered through Cal OES through the state, which is ultimately funded by the federal government and FEMA. And so I'm just going to kind of go through it because a lot of folks are totally oblivious to this even existing. And we have seen a lot more interest, a lot more engagement over the course of the last 5 years. But prior to that, nobody knew what this even was. So we're really trying to expand our voice and get into channels that are, including different folks who have maybe never participated or never heard of this before. So we really want to expand here, and we're hoping that this is going to be able to help some folks today with some future risk. So go ahead, whoever's handling the slides, I'll just tell you next slide. So who are we? First and foremost, we at Cal OES we're responsible for overseeing and coordinating pretty much all emergency activities in regards to preparedness, response, recovery, et cetera. All of those activities through the state. We're the state's Homeland Security Department. And all those response and recovery functions to disasters, large scale events of any type that pose a threat to the state. Cal OES is responsible for leading the efforts to combat those. My branch, the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Branch, our goal is to promote long-term resiliency through implementation of mitigation measures that reduce loss to life and risk to property from disaster. So that is what we look to do. And something important to note is a lot of people immediately want to go down the route of, oh, buy us a fire truck or something. Those are not, our particular branch is not responsible for conducting anything that as it relates to response. We won't buy fire trucks. We don't buy, we won't put fire hydrants in. I'm going to talk a lot about fire related stuff because that's been the hot button issue, obviously lately. But everything that we're looking to do, it has to be something that is going to be a long-term resiliency effort in order to prevent the next disaster from occurring. Next slide, please. So what is hazard mitigation? It is any sustained action taken to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to life and property from natural hazard events. Very important. The reason that is bolded and underlined there is because we will quite frequently see folks who are interested in submitting projects to us or proposed projects to us that are attempting to mitigate something such as maybe a domestic terrorism type of event or something like that. That's not something that our branch under hazard mitigation can look at. We're looking for things that are related to flooding, wildfires, earthquakes, high heat, freezing, tsunamis, whatever it might be. We're looking for projects that mitigate against those naturally derived disaster events. This particular process is ongoing. It occurs before, during, and after disasters, and we hope that it's there to serve as a break in that cycle of damages that occur in hazard-prone areas. The next slide, please. So I want to talk about this because the lines get blurred sometimes between various other things that occur in maybe the recovery stage of a disaster and where hazard mitigation kind of comes in. But the most notable one is public assistance. And public assistance is another program in the recovery infrastructure of that OES handles. And what they are essentially there to do is to repair, restore, reconstruct, replace anything that is damaged or destroyed by disaster. So that right there is not considered a hazard mitigation function because what they are essentially doing there is making you whole again, where hazard mitigation is looking to go above and beyond that scope and essentially prevent that disaster from destroying something again. So these are essentially competitive grants that come out. They're post-disaster related. So unfortunately, something has to happen for the money to become available. But in the last few years, we've had some disasters of such a large scale that the the competitive nature of it's almost been non-existent, because we've had so much funding made available from those disasters that we can help to distribute to cities, counties, special districts, local jurisdictions, and private nonprofits. So there was a lot of funding availability there to be used for all types of mitigation efforts, and help to increase resiliency overall. So what happens, how we essentially receive this money: the disaster occurs, Cal OES has to go out and do these damage assessments to see how much was incurred in terms of damages, and the state then receives a portion of those disaster damage that evaluation, and we receive a portion of that total that can go towards hazard mitigation, projects, whatever it may be. And that opens up that post-disaster funding pool where we start, looking for folks to submit projects to us. So next slide, please. So these funds come from FEMA. They're essentially the bank here. They are just writing the checks. The state does all the work it does all the work in terms of the grant funding, what administering the funding, administering the program, whatever it may be. So FEMA basically provides the money. We solicit the program to all whoever we can get to be involved in the state. And then we pick sub-applicants based on a number of factors. But there are a couple of programs to consider here. The one that seems to come up the most is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and that is specific, like Inez said, specific to presidentially declared disasters, and those are typically competitive statewide. So one of the biggest ones we ever had was the COVID disaster. We actually did receive Hazard Mitigation Grant Program funding for COVID, which was opened up a while back. That has since closed, but that was a very large pot of funding, somewhere north of $450 million for the state of California to use for hazard mitigation projects. Now, some might think, did you have to use that for COVID-related projects or pandemic-related projects? No, we don't. Hazard mitigation is unique in the sense that it doesn't have to be specific to the disaster that we just suffered from. It looks to prevent future disasters from occurring, and we don't know what those future disasters might be. They could be, they're likely to be a lot of more fires. It could be earthquakes. It could be significant flooding, whatever it might be. We will consider projects to help mitigate those potential future losses. So it's made available statewide to any public entities, private nonprofits included in that, and it looks to mitigate from any disaster that we might face in our state. Next slide, please. So Hazard Mitigation Grant Program is going to be the one that you guys are going to want to focus on. I won't talk too much about BRIC and FMA, obviously, because PNPs can't apply for those particular programs. But HMGP is one where PNPs can be involved, and probably one of the biggest things that I could say do to help benefit yourself in this instance and stay apprised to the information and what's going on with us is to go to the website that I'll have posted here at the end and get on our mailing list. That will allow you to know when, the next hazard mitigation, grant program opportunity will arise. It seems like these days we have an opportunity open almost every year. And that's because of the fact that we have such devastating fires every year that take such a toll on the people of the state, the resources here. They take a lot of lives, a lot of structures. It costs a lot of money, and ultimately we receive help from the president that will result in some sort of funding. And we obviously hope that this doesn't occur ever again. We don't want to see this ever occur again, but the likelihood is that it will. That's based on most recent past here. It's very likely we will see large scale fires again every year, and they have made that hazard mitigation funding opportunity open up for us. And we're hoping that if we can do our job to the best of our abilities and everyone can get in, everyone who thinks they can be involved gets involved, we might be able to slow this thing down in the future. Next slide, please. So this is a list of projects that are eligible under the various programs that we offer here. So I would say focus on Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, HMGP, which is obviously the most there. These are the projects that we will look at. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. This is pretty much the main elements that we would look for. There are some things that are outside of the box, outside of your typical, or something new that may not be listed here as of now. But for what you see, everything here is some sort of effort that is looking to reduce the risk to something that may occur in the future. I have wildfire mitigation there highlighted for a specific reason. That's because wildfire is probably our number one most prominent threat right now. We're seeing it so frequently, and it being so devastating on an annual basis, that a lot of the projects that we're looking for, we're hoping to see large scale projects to mitigate those wildfires from occurring. So down there at the bottom, you can see the little statement that says Cal OES has the authority to set specific priorities for each funding opportunity, and we do. As essentially the administrator of the program at the state's level, we do prioritize what we're looking to do at that specific time. Just based on some of our most recent program offerings, some of those priorities were lying with socially vulnerable communities that are in high hazard areas. That's a very specific thing. So we were looking at census designated data for areas that were met a certain criteria for social vulnerability on the social vulnerability index, as it was according to CDC numbers, that were also faced with some significant threat, either a high average threat from multiple from multiple hazard types, or one specific hazard that was disproportionately higher for them maybe than other places. So that was kind of a very specific criteria that we were looking to hit, but we felt that those communities were disproportionately affected by these disasters, and we wanted to be able to help those as best as we could with the money that we received recently. Next slide, please. So this one right here, I think that I'm not going to talk a lot about this because the BRIC program, again, is not something that private nonprofits are eligible to apply for, but that may change in the future. But for the time being, it is not something that is an option for private nonprofits. We can go ahead and skip over this one. So another priority, I guess you could say, that the state has identified with recent hazard mitigation grant funding opportunities was projects that relate to climate resiliency and climate adaptation. These are some just very few examples of what those types of things might look like. Those constructed wetlands, bioswales in highly urbanized areas, rain gardens. These are some concepts of climate resiliency and adaptation project types, and those kind of fold into something known as green infrastructure. Also a big one right now is sea level rise. That is we're looking for projects, since California's got an entire coastline to the left, we're looking to mitigate sea level rise along our coasts. How we can mitigate potential for drought. That's requiring some very innovative approaches to mitigation. But this category of project types is really going to require some outside of the box thinking, because there is no like entire list that will show you every type of thing that you can do to promote climate resilience and adaptation. There's going to be a lot of new things discovered over the course of the next few years, in the future to mitigate those types of things. Next slide, please. Some more focus on wildfire mitigation and what that looks like. Here you see some bottom left there. You've got a defensible space action implemented that's protected that home, saved that home. That's what an effective defensible space mitigation action would look like. You see some aerial hydro seeding going on some hillsides, some soil stabilization measures going on there on the bottom right. But these are a few examples of wildfire mitigation projects that are of high value. Ignition resistant construction, we call it IRC for short. This is essentially taking buildings, mostly private family dwellings, homes in high fire risk areas, and modifying them in a way to make them more resistant to fire. Changing roofs from wood to fire resistant materials, fire resistant siding, eaves and vents that are that close on contact with hot embers. You have to couple that with defensible space and removing vegetation away from the building, kind of like you see in that picture right there. There's hazardous fuels reduction, which is huge right now. This is going into the WUI, the wildland urban interface, and where essentially that's where a community comes in contact with like the forest, for instance, or a heavily vegetated region. In hazardous fuels reduction, we'll go into those areas and reduce, not eliminate, because we won't do that, reduce invasive vegetation, low-lying fuels, ladder fuels, and making it to where fires can't necessarily get out of control in those areas because of the dense amount of fuels that might be found. They remove a lot of that and make that those areas a lot safer. So wildfire mitigation is huge and a very important focus for us here in the state. Next slide, please. An additional funding opportunity that comes up is Hazard Mitigation Grant Program post-fire mitigation. And this is essentially a yearly allotment of funding that is based on the number of fires we received over the course of the year. We have these things called FMAGs, or Fire Management Assistance Declarations, where we reach out to the Fed and say, we need help responding to these fires, we need resources. That has a cost associated with it. That is all kind of calculated at the end of the year and put into a pot of funding where we get a percentage of that to focus on post-fire actions. And those are the ones where we're going to burn scar areas and looking to do soil stabilization measures so we don't see another event like we saw in Santa Barbara in the city of Montecito with that very devastating slide that occurred. I'm going to show some images here of why these are so important, why this stuff is so important. Here's just some images, and this is not a lot. I have quite a few images here, and there's so many more to be had, but you can see just the devastation that's occurred. That Tubbs fire in Santa Rosa, I went there and I saw that. I was there at, in Paradise when that fire occurred. It's just unbelievable what kind of devastation we can see and how important these mitigation actions are to us, you know, as a community, as a state, whatever it might be. If you go to the next slide there, you'll see Montecito, like I mentioned, that's that's what 101 right there, under 6 to 8 feet of mud. There was people boating on the 101 when they were as you can see, the boat right there. Just an unbelievable sight, and there's so much we can do to, you know, help prevent this kind of thing from happening in the future. Next slide, please. So when can you get involved? HMGP again doesn't become available until, you know, something is federally declared, and I'll tell you based on the last few years. There's always something, it seems like, around the corner because we're always seeing another disaster occur here, unfortunately, and we you know, as much as we don't want to see that happen, but we know it's going to happen. The notice of interest period remains open on our website. If you can go ahead and go to the next page. Well, this is some resource information for you guys. If you get involved in the program, I'll want you to definitely have access to these documents so that you're able to kind of look through, you know, what exactly the stipulations of the program are. And excuse my dogs if you can hear them in the background. They must see the mailman out front. Next slide, please. So what I would encourage everyone to do, if you have any interest in what you've heard today, I would say go to our website, the one there at the bottom. You're going to want to, right in the middle of the page, you'll see a picture and something that says get email updates. I would encourage you, if you believe that you are eligible for this and you have prospective projects that you may have considered but have shelved for various reasons, and you think that it might be a good fit for this program, I would encourage you to go to the website, go to the email update section, click on the link there, and sign up to receive those updates. That will allow you to be notified as soon as anything becomes, anything of relevance to the program becomes available. If you believe that you have a project that you've been considering, you think there's some potential that you may be an eligible entity of who offers whatever, I would then also encourage you to go down and look for the section that says, I'm looking at it right now, there's a section about notice of interest. You'll see it's a very small section where you can submit a notice of interest to us. And like Glenn had mentioned, very simple. It's not an exhaustive effort. It's a very basic, essentially like a 5-minute elevator pitch on this is who we are, this is what we want to do. Is it eligible to receive funding? We review it and say yes or no, or work with you to maybe get a little bit more, you know, provide some technical assistance to find out a little bit more about it, and make that ultimate determination. But yeah, you definitely want to go to our website, get involved, sign up for the email links, submit a notice of interest if you might have something, and we look forward to maybe seeing some fresh faces in the program.
Thank you, Anthony. And looking at time, we'll just say a couple things. Mark put up the slide for the survey. Please take the survey. One thing that Anthony didn't mention that I want to commend Cal OES on is that as opposed to previously doing these applications all on paper, doing hard copy, it's all online. It's so much easier. And California's led the way in making this HMGP process so much simpler. I've from local government standpoint, I've applied for and managed HMGP grants before, and Cal OES leads the way in making this simple. So I know that helps the nonprofits as well. I know you have some additional questions. You can definitely reach out after the webinar, take the survey. Anthony provided some information, but you can also reach out and ask additional questions. I want to thank Anthony, Michael, and Glenn, and also Mark and the Earthquake Country Alliance for hosting this. This is great. We hope you take advantage of it. One last thought, I know you saw generators on there, which generators are great, but please use these opportunities to do risk reduction to make sure you don't have impacts. That's where I would land hard, because this is the time to do that.
I couldn't agree more. If you can avoid submitting a generator project, I would avoid it. It is our very last priority on every list that we've ever generated over the course of the last 12 months or so, because it really is not a long-term strategy to risk reduction. So thanks for pointing that out, Inez.
Absolutely. And Glenn had one comment in there about matching potential, is that showing partnership, which nonprofits are great with partnerships, bringing the partners in and showing how they would contribute their time and their efforts, or maybe there's something they would contribute to your projects, helps build your case for support on these. So you all are great at doing partnership and development, but that's a piece of this as well. So please take advantage and use HMGP as a way to make yourself stronger and more resilient. So thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Inez.
Thank you to all our presenters and our attendees, and do please click the link in the chat for the survey. And if you have any questions about this topic, you can email info@earthquakecountry.org or where you got the information for today's webinar, and we will get those to the presenters to get answers for you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.